Good afternoon. Welcome to the March 31st, 2022 meeting of the School Performance and Accountability Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. This meeting is being recorded and will be available after its conclusion via link on the Commission's website. As a reminder, please make sure that your microphone light is on before speaking. Before we begin our business today, Chase, can you take a roll call of the commissioners?
Commissioner Sisnet
Here.
is present. Commissioner Griscom
Here.
is present. Chair Griscom or Chair Richards
Here.
is present. Chairman Richards, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Chase. The School Performance and Accountability Committee will consider several items on our calendar today. First, Tess Stovall and Maggie Lund will provide the committee with a commission school update and updates regarding the commission's pre-opening process with schools scheduled to start in August. Next, Maggie and Beth Figueroa will update the committee about the staff's engagement with school operators. Then Melanie Harrell will discuss school funding for the 2023 fiscal year. Our last agenda item will be a review of the Commission's amendment petition policy from Ashley Thomas. Do commissioners have any questions or comments on the agenda before we vote to approve?
No, I make a motion to approve.
Chase, can you take a vote? Oh, I can do it, okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay. The next item is the approval of the minutes to the January 27th, 2022 and February 10th, 22 meetings. They've been provided in advance. Does anyone have any edits or comments to make regarding the prior minutes before we proceed?
This is Commissioner Sisnet. I would like to make a motion to approve or to move forward with them.
I will second.
Okay, those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. All right, our first agenda item is the school and pre-opening process updates from our Executive Director, Tess Stovall and Maggie Lund. Please proceed.
Is this okay? Great. Tess Stovall, excited to share with you all quarterly updates around school operations, and then I will turn it over to Maggie Lund, who will give you all some site visit updates and pre-opening updates. So just as we do every quarter, here is where we are tracking around enrollment. As we heard when we visited Rocketship this morning, changes in enrollment is something that we regularly see. We will be watching to see how enrollment is shaking out when we're looking into the next school year. I think when you're particularly looking at Bluff City High School, we have been seeing some concerns around their enrollment, and I know that is something that the site visit team talked a lot to their team about, is really how are they stabilizing enrollment. And I will say one of the things that we have seen across all of our site visits is that getting students back in person regularly is a challenge across all schools. And so chronic absenteeism enrollment is just something that I think we are seeing within our portfolio, and I think is a nationwide issue right now. District trends and what we're focusing on. So we are coming up on our TN ready window. So Lawrence is working very closely with our schools to execute on their assessments. We are very excited to hopefully get some really good data. I know school teams are excited to do that. Typically, just from a cadence perspective, schools start to get some initial data late May, early June for them to use for their student grading. We will start getting some preliminary district level data sometime in June. It's typically not lifted in terms of an embargo perspective until August, but we will be sharing that with the full commission as soon as we are able to. Also, we just finished our WIDA assessment as a district. Shout out to Reggie for his work. But that's the annual assessment that schools have to give for English learners. That is a part of our performance framework, so we're excited to see where that growth is for our English learner students. We have seen some upticks in the teacher certification across our portfolio, which we are excited to report. we are starting to focus with our schools now into hiring for next year and really making sure that licensure checks are something that they're doing early, and that when they're hiring an individual, that person has a pathway to licensure. I do know that the General Assembly is discussing continuing to provide some flexibility for permits and licensure for the next coming school year, but we have this conversation early and often, and that this is something that schools and that we prioritize. And then finally, we are seeing improvements around our special populations. That's something that Reggie and our team looked at very specifically in site visits. So we're excited to see those improvements around compliance. We are seeing some staff turnover just generally, not necessarily most specific to our special populations, but as you can imagine, those individuals are highly trained, highly knowledgeable. And so when we see turnover in special populations, we as a staff really lean in to support schools during that transition process.
Madam Chair, may I ask a question to Tess?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So when we look at the licensure, knowing what we've been through, and that we had one of our schools that was really struggling, are we able to make sure that the Department of Education understands their continued role, because we know that was part of the issue, but also as a staff, that hopefully you all send out to all of our schools enough ahead of time, that this is something that, I mean, sort of like that heads up now, and that we're going to come back within a short period of time and sort of see where they are, so they know that we're tracking it, that you all are tracking it, and hopefully we avoid what we know was a very difficult
Yes.
process, particularly with one school. So
Yes, thank you for that question. So from a Department of Education perspective, I have a regular check-in with Eve Carney, who will hear from tomorrow. And so she and I have had conversations over the past year about the struggles we are seeing and how, that we really need them, to be staffed appropriately in their licensure division just to manage the amount of applications that they're seeing. And it's going to continue to be a priority for us and for them. I think on our end, and I think Maggie will speak to us in a little bit, is that we're learning a lot about how do we front load, particularly for our schools that are new into our portfolio, the importance of teacher licensure. And so one of the topics that we have in our pre-opening process is a monthly conversation and topic around licensure, how we do checks, and also that we will monitor you regularly. I think one of the pieces of feedback that I got from a school was that when they have operated in another state, they only got licensure checked once. I said, well, that is not how it's operated here. So, but again, that's a learning experience where they didn't understand. We need to be clearer. And so what's happening right now as we're leading up into the next school year is that we're starting to get staff lists monthly. And we are asking schools to check their staffing licensure monthly. Have you conducted the background checks, et cetera, so that we can be flagging early. So when you get your first quarterly performance review letter in October and we flag, hey, you have 3 teachers that are out of certification, that's not a new concept, and it's not a new priority. And I will say that one of the kind of anecdotal pieces of feedback we have gotten is that at least in 2 schools, and Beth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we have heard that they have received our quarterly performance notes and have said, we want to fix some of those things that are on our performance reviews, which is exactly what we want. So I think that's just a lesson that having that information out there regularly to schools is really important and helps them to prioritize their operations. And I'm sure, Maggie, as you get up, you'll have more to say on this topic because frequent conversations we are having across all things. So I will turn it over to Maggie for site visits.
Great, thank you, Tess. So for site visits, at this time we've completed all of our annual site visits for all commission authorized schools. So that's KIPP, Antioch Collegiate Prep Middle, KIPP, Antioch Collegiate Prep Elementary, Nashville Collegiate Prep, and Bluff City High School. We've sent the site visit reports to all schools except for NCP because we just completed their site visit last week on March 22nd. That report should go out in the next couple weeks to the school. Once all reports have been sent to school teams, a copy of these reports will be shared with commissioners. As a note, these reports are broken down into a summary portion where it gives you kind of like the high level details, and then also a narrative portion where you can go in more detail to learn exactly what we saw on the visit. As a reminder, the site visit is a portion of the annual reporting that we do for schools each year. Bluff City High School is in its interim review year, which means that's within its 5th year of its 10-year charter agreement. Because of this interim review year, Bluff City High School participated in a higher stakes site visit. So that basically just includes 2 full days of commission staff being on site. It also includes more opportunities for classroom observations. They're also longer, so instead of a 15-minute observation, we stay for 30. We also had additional stakeholder interviews. We met with additional parents, additional staff, and additional students. And we had another data meeting in addition to our typical data meeting where we reviewed trends over the 5-year period in which the school has been open in addition to this year's data. Ultimately, at the conclusion of the interim review process, the commission will give an overall rating indicating how the school is progressing towards renewal. The interim review report will be available in addition to the annual reporting done for the school. And if it's determined that the school has major areas of growth to address ahead of renewal in the next 5 years, corrective action plans will be recommended.
Can I ask a question about the annual site visits?
Sure.
Where in this process do we do a review of the reports from the external auditors on each school?
That's a great question. That's with the annual review process that happens at the end of each year.
Okay, so you would do that.
Yep, so the site visits focus more on the academic and operational pieces. We do the financial pieces with the annual audit. That is at the end of each year.
End of the year. Okay, thank you.
And Beth is going to share more about that.
Yes, we do receive the audits. They technically come in around January timeframe, and we don't just receive them and put them on the shelf. We do open up the audits, we review them for findings, any red flags, and we have begun compiling them into our performance framework. So actually, when we do their Q3 review, if there is anything that is glaring in the audit, we do intend to state anything in their Q3 letter.
On your checklist, do you have a place to look at the auditor's opinion on their internal controls and to make sure those are adequate?
That currently is not in the current performance framework, but that would be is something as a past auditor I do look at because that is significantly important. So as we have the discussion about the school performance framework, we would definitely consider adding that.
Okay, if you would consider it, I would feel a lot better.
We also have a fiscal component of our results-based monitoring that we do as part of our compliance for federal funding purposes. And with that, we do some very basic checks around internal controls. And then if we ever found anything that was a flag in an audit, that would result in kind of an increased risk and greater monitoring as part of our RBM process. So it's also checked there.
Okay, yeah, as you can probably surmise, this is being driven in part by our review that we're going to take up tomorrow. I do think it's very critical that with respect to our schools, we make certain that we not only we check from the outside auditor's point of view that they believe the internal controls are appropriate, but also that as a part of our financial review that we also do that. Because I think that's one of the things that it's just basic blocking and tackling for this process. So thank you.
Madam Chair, may I ask a follow-up question?
Surely.
This is great to see, but from a previous board I served on, we had a couple problems that came up, but as a board, we didn't find out about it until it was really almost out of control. So as you all are working through this, do your annual reports, if you flag a school or two or whatever that's got real issues, that I think it'd be helpful if you agree, for us to sort of have that so we know we're tracking it so that if we get to a position where it's time to vote on renewing a charter, it's not sort of the first time we've heard it. I'm not saying it would be, but that there is a process that you all have set up that would probably come back to this committee that would allow us to sort of know, that we've seen this for a couple of years. Here's the plan you've put in place, and whether that school is making progress or not, so that we sort of have a pretty good indicator that we've got a school here that maybe is not, is going to be in trouble, or hopefully they're not. But that may be how you're going to lay this out, but I wanted to suggest, Madam Chair, that at least for us, so that we know what you all are looking at, and if you see one that you think maybe is going to be a question mark 2 or 3 years out, that, we're sort of working with you all as you work through that process.
Thank you for that. I think we need to add it with the completion of the annual review. And there should be a sort of a summary of the annual review, clearly processing if there's anything that is of concern or deficient that's brought to the board's attention each year at a minimum. Of course, we can then ask for an update on a quarterly basis if we need to get an update in the following year.
Absolutely. Anything else to add, team? For that? Okay, great. Great, thank you. I wanted to take a moment to share some of the trends that we saw from our site visits. These are definitely just high-level trends that we saw across all of the schools that we visited. Really great things. Proficiency rates on internal assessments are showing really promising growth. This is particularly a great thing to see coming out of the last 2 years with the return to in-person school and lack of state testing data. This furthers the narrative that in-person school is what's best for kids, and it's showing promising trends towards TN Ready for the end of this year. Another area of strength across all commission-authorized schools is that schools are providing a safe community where students can learn. All families and students reported feeling safe within their community, feeling welcome, and all students reported feeling that they had an adult that they can trust in the building. Some areas of concern that we kind of garnered through these visits, as Tess mentioned earlier, staffing and chronic absenteeism are trends of concern. Staffing continues to be a going concern given the nationwide shortage. Many schools experience turnover with staff and leadership over the last year, and they're working hard in terms of recruitment efforts for next year. In addition, chronic absenteeism continues to be a challenge for all schools with the return to in-person learning. I do want to shout out that KIPP Antioch Collegiate Prep Elementary has one of the lowest chronic absenteeism rates across all schools authorized by the Commission. However, that low rate is still higher than it was pre-pandemic. So this is something that schools are tracking and monitoring closely. It was something we discussed in depth during our visits. All of our schools have pretty robust family engagement plans and are working to address all of those chronic absenteeism issues. Okay, I'll move to talk about pre-opening. So as a reminder, we have 2 schools that are going through the traditional New Start pre-opening process. That's Rocket Ship number 3, which you visited their sister school, Rocket Ship United Academy, this morning, and Cornerstone Prep School in Memphis. We also have 3 schools that are transitioning to us from the ASD that are completing the transition process at this time, which is just an adjusted pre-opening process. And these schools are Libertas, Cornerstone Prep Denver Campus, and Lester Prep. We're very excited to report that the pre-opening process and transition process for all of these schools is going very smoothly. The Commission staff has provided monthly trainings for school operators to help throughout this pre-opening process and the transition to the Commission as their authorizer. We know that for many of our schools, this is new and different. We heard it at Rocket Ship today, the differences between having an MNPS authorized school and a Commission authorized school. We know there are differences. So the intent with these monthly meetings is to really kind of tackle some of those differences head on and provide some best practice training for our operators. So we've led the following best practice meetings, authorizing and ongoing monitoring, and what to expect. We've covered enrollment and data management. Major shout out to Lawrence for navigating all the difficulties when it comes to moving over major amounts of data into our systems. That is no easy feat. Also talking about grants and funding was our most recent pre-opening meeting that we had. And then coming up, we also have for April, teacher licensure, staffing, and special populations. We will cover that. And in May, we have our policy audit pre-opening best practice meeting. One note is that we have heard from Rutherford Collegiate Prep that due to challenges in acquiring their facility, they've opted to delay opening until next school year. This will be school year 2023-2024. We'll continue to work with RCP to ensure that they have everything that they need for a smooth school opening next year. So some more pre-opening updates. Again, we're excited and pleased to report that the process has overall been going smoothly. All schools have submitted their materials on time for deadlines, and all schools are on track to open or transition fully to the commission by next school year. For our ASD schools, this process is also running pretty smoothly. Documentation is being shared and processes are being transferred. We have encountered some items along the way that we've noted as shifts or changes that we'll make to the process for next time, as this is our first time with a transition such as this. However, we will continue to garner school operator feedback throughout this process. Finally, the commission is working with schools currently to set up student information systems, as I mentioned earlier, and running and working to secure enrollment projections for the next school year.
One quick question. How is the cooperation with the Memphis Shelby County Schools in this process with the ASD schools?
I'd say it's been pretty good so far. We've had good communication. There has been some back and forth regarding special population support that we're still working through, but ultimately it's been a good process.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay. Well, thank you and thank you and Tess both. I guess we'll move on to our next item, which is an update on the staff's engagement with our authorized school operators. I want to recognize Beth Figueroa and Maggie Lund to present this item.
Nope. Where's the thing? Display. Full screen. Is that it? Thanks for your clickers. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Richards, and good afternoon, School Performance and Accountability Committee members. My name is Beth Figueroa, and I'm here today to talk about really just the different ways that we've been engaging with our school operators in order to get quality feedback as we work on establishing processes and making different changes. So the authorizing team, we've been increasing our engagement with school operators through a variety of different methods. Tess previously mentioned that we have quarterly performance feedback letters that we provide them, and this has been a really great opportunity to have interval checkpoints along the way where we can communicate to school leaders the area of strengths, but also areas where they need to focus operationally. And so whether it be teacher licensure issues, maybe there's items with the tracking and monitoring of special populations, we mention all of those. And then also, as Tess mentioned, there's been some school leaders who have said, thank you for letting us know. And so we've seen things that were previously identified as area of focus moving up into the areas of strength. So that's a very positive thing. So we've been providing these letters since fall of 2021, and these reviews will culminate in the annual performance report, which will include and highlight the academic, financial, and organizational pieces that are included in the school performance framework. We also held our first quarterly stakeholder meeting on March 25th, and that was a really great opportunity for us to collaborate amongst all of the schools in our portfolio. And it was also great having all of the schools within the same kind of virtual room where they could also bounce ideas off of one another. We also have established an external stakeholder group comprised of a designated representative from each of our schools to provide feedback on the school performance framework. Maggie's going to go into detail on that. And so far, we've already covered with them what is included in the current performance framework, but also areas that they might want to see additional changes in the weights. Maybe they want to see certain items added, such as mission-specific items, school culture, etc. And then also the authorizing and LEA team, we are collaborating for holding pre-opening meetings for the 5 schools that will be opening for the 2022-23 school year. All of these opportunities for operator engagement have been really beneficial. We've already received a lot of positive feedback from our school operators. They notice the increase in engagement and they appreciate it. Also, for the quarterly meetings, we have, it was really wonderful. All of the schools had an opportunity to just share the celebrations that were going on in their schools. And that was a really great time for them to collaborate and really get ideas from other schools that had things going well on their campuses. It also has given staff the opportunity to collect feedback as we go about, revising our school performance framework, creating things such as the amendment policy, all of those items it's been helpful for. Also, if we think about our commission strategic plan, we really emphasize the importance of building and cultivating strong relationships with communities, our operators, and our schools. So it really aligns with that. And then in the fall, we will be doing our authorizer engagement, or our authorizer evaluation, which is conducted by the State Board of Education. And all of these things bring us closer to alignment with quality authorizing standards. So as mentioned, the commission staff held our first quarterly stakeholder meeting last Friday, where we discussed the commission policy updates that were covered and heard by the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee, and also included discussion on the amendment petition policy, which Ashley will be discussing later. And that was a great time for them to also kind of get a preview of what changes we're going to be making to their policy, and they were able to provide us real valuable feedback, especially related to the amendment petition policy. Discussing the topics that specifically impact schools within our portfolio really helped us also garner an understanding for how the policies and processes that we're putting in place impact them on an individual basis. So our school operators have already provided us with a list of topics that they would like to cover in the future. So they are definitely engaged in the process and already have let us know that they want to talk about the Commission's fiscal policy. They'd like to discuss legislative updates. And also they really did enjoy that time of celebration. And so they want to continue to spotlight the great things that are happening at their schools. And so Maggie will now discuss the school performance framework and the feedback that we've received so far.
Yes.
So on that last point you made, Beth, about liking that spotlight, is there a time maybe at one of our meetings where we build into our schedule, our regular quarterly meeting schedule, an opportunity to spotlight one of these schools that you all have seen, so that we as a commission give them the same kind of recognition that you are giving to them as the commission staff. But I would suggest that might be another way to sort of hopefully encourage them, to continue with the good work they're doing. I know at TBR every now and then we would bring somebody in to really recognize the work they had done. And I just would suggest if you are comfortable with that, Tess, that might be a good thing to do at one of our meetings in a regular calendar year.
Absolutely. Thank you for that feedback, and we'd love to implement it.
Great. So as Beth mentioned, we held a school operator information gathering session last week to discuss the school performance framework refresh. Before I move further to talk about high-level trends, I'd like to give a special shout out to Commissioner Cisnet, who has been an integral part of this process and has already provided really wonderful feedback. So I look forward to continuing it through the remainder of the spring. So we had great attendance with all commission-authorized schools represented at this meeting. The purpose of this meeting was to garner thoughts from our school operators about our current performance framework. There was feedback received from schools to ultimately keep this framework simple for the sake of consistency and transparency. Any additions or adjustments to the framework require nuance and can add more complexity and adjust capacity for commission staff. Many ideas were shared and items were discussed. However, it's the Commission's decision as to what we believe in schools in our portfolio should be measured as and what indicators of school performance should be. I'll be sharing some high-level trends that our schools shared during this meeting, but would love and value your insight and feedback on these trends as well during this time. Some of the feedback and information gathered were around general support for a mission-specific school goal and respective key indicators. For many schools, this was a favorable choice as a way to reflect their mission and alternative methods to track growth within populations they serve, as reflected within their original charter agreement. And in addition, this is a way to capture other school-specific data that doesn't live within the framework, such as nationally normed assessments, like MAP, or something that would track growth. Currently within the framework, there is a comparison piece that compares schools to their resident district. The benefit of this piece is to see general trends of the school in comparison to the overall district performance in terms of achievement. However, we know that the resident district does not incorporate any nuance regarding to neighborhood or demographics served for a particular school. And during our school operator feedback session, we heard suggestions and feedback surrounding doing instead a geographic comparison, which would compare the neighborhood in which the school pulls students from, and also a demographic comparison to schools that serve similar demographics. Both are somewhat complicated in terms of pulling. There's more examination needed on our end in determining what data is readily available for pulling in this way. But ultimately, schools feel that they want a comparison more so that basically looks at similar populations because they believe that that's a more meaningful comparison and more nuanced than to the entire district as a whole. Do you guys have any feedback for us as we consider these comparisons and begin to walk through the examination of this process? Great. In addition, during our school operator stakeholder session, there was a noted push to put more weight on comparison data in relation to the school report card and academic achievement. It is a key indicator of if the charter school is in fact providing a better option for students. And finally, there was also general support for a demographic and subgroup comparison piece being added to the framework to ensure equity and access. This would involve measuring what populations the school is serving and how it trends to other schools in the area or potentially the district. Currently, in the school performance framework, school culture indicators include suspension rates, student attrition, and teacher retention. With regards to the suspension rate, there was a push to include indicators that would identify exclusionary practices within the framework. However, there was general support to keep the suspension rate within the framework. There were concerns raised with the weighting on student attrition, as it does not take into account the fluidity of neighborhoods in which the schools serve. There were ideas offered regarding different tracking mechanisms for student attrition, taking into account more detail of why students leave and tracking students who end up enrolled in a given charter school as a result of being counseled out elsewhere. There were also concerns with teacher retention, similar to student attrition. As a note, teacher retention pieces within the framework holds harmless teachers who were moving to another position within the organization, whether it's a whole network or moving to leadership, and also does not include within that rate like intentional dismissal. So in summary, the commission feels that keeping teacher retention and student attrition are important as they're strong indicators for school culture. However, we are considering adjusting weighting on these pieces, and I would love to hear your thoughts in terms of student attrition, teacher retention, and suspension rate for school culture, if you have anything to add.
Well, I would just add that I think it is very important to continue to measure and include those various aspects. The weighting is something that should be discussed and is a more fluid situation, but you can't manage what you don't measure. So I think keeping the measurement as a part of this is a very important part of us being effective in our ability to help these schools be effective charter schools.
Great, thank you. Additionally, on the school culture piece, there were general concerns with utilizing a survey to measure school culture given the complexity of this. With the push for transparency, there were concerns raised around district-issued and school-issued surveys. Ultimately, the feedback was shared that school culture indicators are good, but should be weighted less than overall performance because ultimately school culture directly impacts performance. A follow-up survey was sent to all operators in attendance to allow for additional feedback if any operators were unable to discuss it during the meeting. The commission staff will collect this feedback and share it with SchoolWorks, who we've consulted with to help us through this process. The commission staff and SchoolWorks are wrapping up information gathering session with external stakeholders next week, and we will begin crafting Begin looking at trends and then begin crafting any sort of proposals in terms of any changes that we may see fit to the framework. We'll continue to engage stakeholders in this process, and I would like to extend, again, a special thank you to Derwin for your participation. Your feedback and insight has been invaluable.
All right. I also want to join the staff in thanking Derwin for his assistance and help with this. It's a very important part of what we're doing. I appreciate and hope that SchoolWorks is helping you identify anything that is being advanced outside Tennessee in this area. So if there are other components of the framework that we ought to consider going forward, that those are being included in this process. But it sounds like an excellent process. Are there any other comments or questions?
Great. I'll only add, part of our external stakeholder process is people who are external of our organization as well. So we are working to garner that feedback. And we plan to have a finalized, refreshed school performance framework in front of the commission for approval in the July meeting.
Great. Thank you very much, Beth and Maggie. We appreciate your thoughtful approach to engaging with these operators. Unless there are other questions or comments, we'll move on to our next agenda item, which is a presentation from Melanie Harrell on the funding for the 2023 fiscal year. Hello, Melanie.
Thank you so much, Chair Richards. I will try to pull this up. There we go. Okay, I did manage it. Thank you so much again. I'm excited to tell you and the committee a little bit about our state and federal funding processes for next year. We know this has been a hot topic, obviously this year, both in the General Assembly and in our conversations with operators. So I'm just going to give a kind of high-level overview about what we're expecting for next year and where we are in these current processes. So first, I want to talk a little bit about the BEP. As a reminder, the BEP payments are based on student enrollment at each school. So currently, this is a per pupil rate based on state funding and a local district's revenue calculation. We all have discussed. We do know there is obviously big legislation moving through the General Assembly, potentially changing the BEP, but that would not go into effect until school year 23-24. So we are still operating under the current formula for next school year. So as Maggie mentioned, something that we work closely with our operators in pre-opening on is collecting their enrollment projections. And this is particularly important because those projections are used for their first quarter of payments for the BEP for New Start schools. So what we really stress to our operators is that the BEP is trued up periodically throughout the year. And what we have seen some charter schools struggle with in the past is if they wildly sort of overestimate their enrollment and may not be keeping a close eye on it, that October true up can result in, substantial losses in terms of cash flow. So we closely monitor our schools' enrollment projections each month as part of their submissions, and we also have conversations with them about if something's not looking right, making sure that they're keeping an eye on how many applications they received and how many students they have fully enrolled. For ASD, transitioning ASD schools, this will look a little bit different. It will still be their previous year ADM that will be used for their first quarter payments since those schools are already fully built out. I also want to give a little bit of an update on our consolidated funding application. This has already been released. It is the statewide application process that is used for all of our federal entitlement funds. So all title programs are encompassed in this application, as are our IDEA funds. As a reminder, we pass through 100% of these funds to our schools, so we're not holding any of this for administration or indirect costs. So something that is a little bit different this year is that initial allocations have been delayed from the state. That is because the federal appropriations were tied up with some relief funding at the national level, and so those allocations actually were just given to states. So we are still anticipating that these initial allocations will be released in April, although this is a bit of delay from previous years. So similar to the BEP, it is also projections that are used for initial allocations for our new schools for the CFA. again, underlying the importance of making sure schools are keeping a close eye on these. It will also be previous year demographics that are used for ASD schools and also any of our current schools that are fully built out. So Bluff City will also have, for example, their CFA allocations based on this year's enrollment. We will receive final allocations in September and redo our budgeting process at that point. When we are formulating our school level allocations in September, that will be based on kind of true year enrollment in EIS. So there is an opportunity for us to kind of true up based on what we actually see at the start of the year. Additionally, we are anticipating that keeping again, enrollment projections in mind, the TDOE will be reviewing our allocation likely in December of next year to make sure that there's not sort of a massive swing one way or the other, to also do a true up to make sure that we're not saying that we're 15 or 20% off of our enrollment projections. So just as another note, we currently use school-wide pool for the title programs and IDEA. What that means is that schools are able to combine all of these individual allocations that have their separate requirements into one pot of money. And at that point, they kind of lose their individual strings that are attached to each funding stream, and they are able to use those for any of the allowable expenses for any of those programs. This is something that TDOE has kind of expressed interest in pursuing more schools to use. It really maximizes our operator flexibility on how to use these funds, and it's something that we have generally heard very good feedback from operators in terms of being able to maximize their autonomy.
Quick question. Do we
yes.
have something in writing from the federal government that says it's okay to do that?
Oh, yes. So school-wide pool procedures are very well spelled out in statute. There is federal guidance, TDOE guidance, and then we have our own policies and procedures around school-wide pool.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. That was a good question. Yes. So we will be something, as Maggie mentioned, that we have heard feedback from operators on, as we know there's a lot happening with funding around the state in general. This will be a big year. And so as our portfolio grows and as we see kind of greater diversity across our portfolio, we know schools are interested in engaging in conversations around what our funding methodology will be. So again, knowing that this is a very important potentially transition year for the state, we're going to plan to be engaging our schools in conversations around funding methodology. If we want to revisit the way that we do some of our weightings for IDA funds, for example, for the future. And so we're anticipating working through that this school year and likely updating our policies and procedures for FY24. And then one of our last pieces of federal funding that we know is large and on a lot of people's mind is our ESSER funding. We are monitoring our schools' drawdowns of ESSER funds. Currently, ESSER 1.0 funds will expire toward the end of this fiscal year. And then ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 will still have some carryover. We will be estimating and identifying our carryover estimates during our FY22 close process, which will begin in mid-April and really finish out in May. So at that point, we will get a better sense of how much of ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funding our schools are anticipating carrying into next year. We did also want to share that we received a Best for All district designation, and with that came $175,000 in grant funding. And so currently our intent with our Best for All grant funding, though our application still has to be submitted and approved by the TDOE, is to allocate these funds to our new and transitioning schools, knowing that they missed out on some of the opportunities to get ESSER funds in the past. So we're excited about that funding and excited to be able to extend those opportunities to some of our new schools. The last thing I want to highlight is that some of our ESSER funding is going to be targeted at our summer learning loss camps. We are very excited to have one of our charter schools offering their own summer learning loss camp this year, and we'll be working with them on allocating both our district allocation towards that, but also some additional ESSER funding, since we think that will be very important. With that, I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Are there any questions? Well, congratulations on your Best for All grant. That's wonderful. The only thing I would ask, are there any concerns about our school's ability to work with their, someone to provide a summer learning camp opportunity to their students if they don't do it themselves?
That is a great question. So I think we've had some ambiguity in conversations currently, and I know this is something that we've talked about in terms of this legislative session around the contracting responsibilities that the geographic LEA would have for our students. So currently, we have seen an unwillingness of the geographic LEA to serve our students in their summer camps. That is something that we are working closely with the department on, as well as our schools, to keep an eye on and see what the guidance is going to be going forward, both for this year and for next year. But we do have one of our schools in Davidson County offering their own summer learning camps. And so we're excited to have them be providing that opportunity for our students.
And I'll just add some color commentary. You know, the law does allow a charter school to opt out of offering it. And then the law also says that the geographic LEA will serve those students. But we are in this circular argument where we have geographic LEAs not willing to contract. So then it really puts our charter schools at a disadvantage of, well, where do they fit into the bigger piece? That's something that I know Chase and I have talked about from a legislative perspective. Can we fix this problem? And also, I just think we need to continue to encourage our charter schools about the benefits of the summer learning program and hosting those programs. But we are also targeting the school that we do have that is offering the summer learning program, that as a backup plan, should we not be able to get the geographic district to serve the students that the school does not want to host the camp, could we offer some opportunities for those students to attend the camp that our school is offering? But this is a challenge, and I think this gets to some of the things that we have focused on from a legislative perspective of, as a statewide district, we still have responsibilities as an LEA. And I think in particular, we have seen around alternative schools and the summer learning camps that a lot of times we are at the will of a geographic district. And that is, we don't want to that's an adult problem, that's not a student problem. And so, we want to make sure that we have, we are willing to pay all of our bills, but what do we need to do both contractually but also legislatively to make sure that both parties can come to the table and work out an agreement such that our students can be served? But it's an ongoing, and I think, Tom and I have a lot of conversations about this. I think we are going to continue to surface some of these issues that were not contemplated when a statewide LEA was created. And right now we have schools that are concentrated in Memphis and Nashville. But when we have a Rutherford County, or we maybe have schools other places, what does that mean, and how do we make sure that everyone is able to serve students effectively?
Thank you for that additional insight. There are things that are going on. I know you're talking to our chairman, but if there's anything else that the rest of us can do, obviously it's an important opportunity to ensure we do the right thing for the kids. And we need to take care of the adult problems, as you put it.
Absolutely.
Other comments, questions? Well, thank you so much for your report. We appreciate it. We'll go on to our final item on the agenda, which is a presentation from Ashley Thomas on the Commission's amendment petition policy. Ashley, you're here to walk through this once we get the presentation up for you.
Thank you, Chair Richards. Ashley Thomas, General Counsel for the Commission. So the policy before the committee today is Policy 3.900. This is a new policy dealing with amendment petitions filed by Commission-authorized schools. I know this is in the packet for the committee, but I pulled it up on the screen just so that we could all be looking at the same portions. So this policy requires the governing boards of Commission-authorized schools submit documentation with their petition, in addition to the requirements outlined by the Department of Education's application. This came from the committee's discussion in January, as well as conversation that I had earlier with the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee. This policy does outline that the school amendment petition provide documentation that includes the academic results of the school, a statement addressing any noted deficiency of the school, the impact of an improved amendment on neighboring schools, contingency plan if the amendment is declined, and evidence of community support where the amendment petition is related to enrollment. As Beth mentioned earlier in her presentation, this policy was presented to during the quarterly stakeholder meeting, and a point of discussion was raised, and I would like to get the committee's feedback on that. Since our amendment petitions deal with material modifications, the question was surrounding whether all of the listed supporting documentation will be required for all amendments. And the example that was used was if a school decides to amend their charter agreement to add or remove a transportation plan, would all of these supporting documentations need to be required? And so I wanted to present that to the committee first. I will say possible solutions during my discussion with the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee is a change to the introductory language under Section 1. Section 1 currently reads, in addition to the requirements outlined in the Tennessee Department of Education's amendment petition application, the governing board shall include with its amendment petition the following information. And the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee proposed that after the comma, so after, in addition to those requirements, the governing board shall include with its amendment application information relevant to the amendment for which they are seeking. That includes all of that information, but is not limited to that information. But I will pause for feedback from this committee.
Yes, so I get now with the change in language, it ensures that there are other areas that we could add if need be, but it doesn't necessarily speak to limiting, let's say we only need item A or B for transportation. I'm not sure if that applies. I'm wondering if there's a way to, pivot in the language a little bit, just say, relevant and, leave it to our discretion.
Okay. I will say under the list of supporting documentation, it does allow for the commission staff to go back for additional information. And again, this sort of comes from the amendment we had earlier in the year where we had the interview and we had additional information, and we want to try to minimize the burden on the schools as they're going through this process. Tess, if I can call on you to sort of give your color as to what you were thinking as far as this list is concerned.
Yes, thank you. What I was thinking is there may be some things on this list that we know we would want for all petitions. I think an example that I used earlier was we want to know the backup plan should the petition not be approved. But maybe do we create a table or a matrix that says, if you're proposing the transportation plan, we don't need to know your teacher turnover rate. But if you're proposing to expand, add grade levels, then you're going to need to provide us all of this information. If you're wanting to move your facility, we would need to know more about the impact on neighboring schools than we would need to necessarily know about your turnover rate. So my proposal is, and again, this is on first reading, so we're gathering feedback from you all. We'll talk about it more tomorrow in our operators, is to bring this back with somewhat of a rearranging of the list so we are clear about, regardless of the amendment petition type, this is the information we want. And then if you're looking for something more substantial, you need to be prepared to provide this additional information. We, as Ashley said, we really want to minimize the burden and also be really clear with our schools about what we're expecting in terms of documentation so that when they are putting together their amendment petition, they know, hey, we're going to need to pull all of our special populations data, teacher turnover data, et cetera. So it's a really clean process. So that's initially what I'm thinking based on the feedback I've heard today.
Okay. Yeah, my concern with this is that I think it needs to be more today. I don't want to go forward with an approval or anything along those lines till we have this worked out. I think conceptually, we're all in support of what you just explained because we don't want to make people do work just to be doing work that isn't necessary, but I think it needs to be split out out into, those are the things we absolutely have to have all the time, no matter what, your name, those kinds of things. And then things that are tied to the nature of the specific amendment, and break them apart.
And just for point of clarity, so the Rules, Policy, and Governance Committee did approve this on first reading, so it will be presented tomorrow for discussion in front of the full commission. But I think that's great color as well. As Tess mentioned, I will take this feedback, we will rework the policy and bring it back before both committees.
Okay, thank you.
Just as a suggestion, this might have been what you're thinking of conceptual anyway, but just building off of Chair Richards' comments, I'm wondering if there's a way to bucket it. Like if this is, an amendment that is academically related, then we include blank blank. If it's related to facilities, then blank blank is, or operations. I think that'd be helpful even for us commissioners to see, what they're petitioning, or what they want to amend and what it relates to, because then we could also take a bird's eye view of what that means for the commission as a whole.
And that sort of looks like one of the solutions that I had written down, of sort of based on what the petition is, this is the supporting documentation we would need in addition to the department's application. Okay, I will take that feedback. Thank you.
Okay, and is there a time problem if we just do this on like first reading at this meeting and then go for final approval in July?
That is what's being proposed currently. So this would be first reading. We would go back and work it with all of the feedback and then bring it to the committees again and to the full commission for a vote in July.
Okay, thank you. You want to present anything else on this, or does that cover?
Unless there
Where
are
we
other
are.
questions, that was all I have for the committee.
Okay, any other comments, questions? All right, thank you so much. All right, thank you all for your attendance and participation at this meeting of the School Performance and Accountability Committee of the Tennessee Public Charter School Commission. At this time, I'd like to ask if there are any other final comments?
A second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. I don't hear any opposition. Thank you. Our next meeting is scheduled for July 28th, 2022, and we are adjourned.
Suit.